Yes, so I wonder, Sue, if we can start by talking about the show that is here today, your exhibition of power, that includes quite a lot of recent work, some of it very recent from the last couple of years. Do you want to say a little bit about how this show came about and the more recent work?
Yes. Most of my work was done in the 70s, a little bit into the 80s, and then with a huge gap of 30 or 40 years while I had to work for a living. I then started again during, probably just before, the couple of years before lockdown. And that was mainly because I was approached by someone who wanted to be an agent for me to help me to get my work seen more and hopefully to get something to public galleries. And through working with her, we had a link to Wolverhampton and we came here and they agreed to put on a show. So that was all organised some years ago. You know, it seems like ages ago now. And during that time, between then and now, I've done quite a lot of work that's in the show next door. So there's a mixture of things from different times. Quite a lot of what's next door was done during lockdown, and therefore it involves masks, lots of masks. But also it was a chance to catch up with all of the years when I didn't have any time or headspace to make any art. So all the things about premenstrual syndrome and menopause and even pregnancy and stretch marks and all those things that, you know, happen to women. And I was able to make work about, in retrospect, you know, looking back and thinking back to how it was for me, but how it probably still is anyway, you know, I don't think that much has changed.
So the work that you can see next door, if you haven't already, includes quite a lot of self-portraits, and you work in this mode, but what do your self-portraits look like?
Right. I use self-portrait because it's a great way of showing how you're viewed by the world at different stages in your life. You know, there's a vast difference to a self-portrait when you're in your early 20s or late teens to one when you're in your 70s. So I had great fun, you know, making things, particularly now, you know, with loads of varicose veins and stretch marks and, you know, all the things that we have that are beautiful, you know, as well as annoying. The latest self-portrait I've done is the one that comes out of a bag, and it's a bit of a statement about when you get to a certain age, you know, there's a poem about wearing purple. Well, it's kind of that, you know, that you can come out of the bag and do anything you want. So, yeah. When I was younger, it was more about how everybody else was seeing me and what I didn't like about the way they were seeing me, you know? So these things do change a lot over the years, but they don't change in relation to how old you are. In other words, if you're 18 now, it's exactly the same, probably worse, you know, because of social media and the fact that, you know, eyes are on you every minute of the day, in every, you know, form that you take.
Okay, one of the first things that we see when we enter the gallery is the earliest work that you've made, which, have you always viewed that as a work or as practice? Sunburst is the one I'm talking about from 1974. Yeah. So that was made for whom and under what circumstances?
Right, well, when my son was just a few months old, and I'd sort of fairly recently learned how to crochet from a friend, I thought I'd have a go at trying out different stitches, so I made this big sunburst kind of thing on the floor while he was crawling around and just practiced doing things, and worked out that for me it was a very easy way of constructing things. I'm not good at painting and not even great at drawing really. I like writing about things, and from those ideas I just happened to come across crochet as being one of the ways, particularly alongside found objects and bits of clothing, things that are particular to me in, you know, my life. It was just a good combination, and I could kind of, unlike knitting, you can kind of decide on a pattern. You know, you could draw around yourself on a piece of wallpaper, and then you can just keep putting your bit of crochet down on top of it until it makes the right shape. So it was, for me, a nice, easy way of working.
And then there is a little, could it be a self-portrait? I tend to think of it as a self-portrait, which is another little pattern that has me.
Is that the me one?
The me
the
one.
me one. Yes. When we first decided to take part in this Postal Art Event, where we were sending little bits of artwork through the post to friends, some artists, some not, all over the country and in different places as well. I just thought it was a good way of introducing myself to one of the other artists by crocheting a little thing that said me. So that was one of the first things that I sent through the post.
So let's talk a little bit about Feministo, which is the first art group that you were part of. And the work from there was exhibited on a few occasions, but originally it's worth saying that it did not start as an exhibition project, but rather as an exchange of small works over the post. So it was a postal art project. But it has also been described as a consciousness-raising group in material form. I think it was Philippa Goodall who said that. What do you think about that? Did it feel that way to you?
I think so. I mean, you know, I was fortunate enough to be in Birmingham at that particular time in the 70s and to live in an area where there were consciousness-raising groups, you know. It was kind of all a bit scary, you know, because we were near Birmingham Uni and there was the Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies and things that I didn't really understand were going on, you know, but it was very nice to join a group of other women who, you know, I'd met at the baby clinic, who had got children, little children, babies really, you know, the same age, and to work with them and just decide, you know, when we met Kate in London at an arts conference and she said, would you like to join in, you know, on this postal art thing? I'm sending it to my friend because she's moved to the Isle of Wight and don't see her anymore. And so we started sending things to each other, you know, through the post. And I think it became a bit consciousness raising in that quite often you were sending a reply to a piece of work that had been sent to you, you know, whether it was a written one or an actual piece of work. And I mean, initially that's all it was, but several of us decided we'd like to exhibit some of the work. And if people wanted to, they could send you the things back. And we organised exhibitions where we could show things. It was all anonymous, and some people didn't want to exhibit, so that was fine. But those of us that did found that, you know, it got very varied response. Sometimes things disappeared, sometimes they had cigarettes stubbed out on, and other times, you know, you'd have really nice comments from women about how they'd often felt like sticking their head in the oven just like that little sculpture there, you know. So it was, you know, it was an interesting experience, which eventually ended up at the ICA. I mean, eventually we did exhibit there through a friend of ours who'd moved there and allowed us women in, you know, for a weekend during the Silver Jubilee.
Yes, interesting sort of timing. Do you want to say anything more about that? What it was like to put the work up at the ICA, to have people come see it there? Because previously it had been shown in some women's centres around the country. So
yeah, the Arts Lab in Birmingham and, you know, various library venues, that kind of thing. It was interesting at the ICA because everybody was at the Silver Jubilee. There was nobody there, just the women who were exhibiting. And we had one technician who was brilliant and put up all these big boxes for us that were like rooms, so that we could have a living room, a bedroom, a kitchen setting. And when we looked at all of the work that we collected together, it just fell into themes. You know, there's loads of stuff about self-image, loads of stuff about food and about consumption and about being part of the wallpaper. And, you know, there were just these common themes that had come from women individually and separately. But suddenly, when you put it together, you know, it was like a big cry for help, really. And so we spent the whole weekend there sort of inventing these rooms and putting work into the drawers and onto the tables and into the fridge. And we also spent quite a lot of time converting one of the boxes into what we called a rape box. We just had one little quote from a newspaper about a rape that had happened. And we put that inside this big white box, and on the outside we just covered it with bits of magazines that were, you know, things like Playboy, I think they were called in those days, I can't remember what they were, but men's magazines anyway, with cut up loads of bits of women's bodies and stuck them so the entire outside of it was wallpapered in women's bodies. And just, you know, enjoyed working together really, and that was something that just came about because we were there together and we got similar ideas about what we wanted to do. So it was a great experience to sort of, you know, work with other women.
So your work has been re-exhibited quite a few times. I forgot to say that I actually got to meet Sue before, when I had the honour of curating a small retrospective of your work that included a lot of work from Feministo and some more recent pieces from as recent as 2011. That was in 2012 at Goldsmiths at the Women's Art Library, and the Constance Howard gallery there. And since then, it's been also shown at Raven Row, in an interesting sort of constellation working through the domestic politics of feminist art in the 70s and since. And the very interesting book / catalogue that comes from Raven Row has some pages from the visitors book to your ICA show. And someone who claims to be David Hockney, you understand there's no way of verifying this, says self-conscious hypocrisy, misspelled hypocrisy, and you know it. So there was a lot of abuse, as you say. Some work was stolen as well, and it is interesting to think about what that means. Stealing work is not necessarily criticism, it could be exactly the opposite. But what impact did that have on you at the time?
What, things going missing and things?
Well, things going missing, very strong reactions, some of which were negative. On the other hand, it's worth noting that Waldemar Januszczak, that you probably know, was very positive about Feministo at the time.
Yeah, I think it was very mixed, very mixed feelings. I mean, there were sometimes we'd be interviewed, and even by women who were obviously desperately hanging on to their jobs as reporters. There weren't that many women reporters back in that day. Who would be great when they were talking to you, but when you read the article, it had been edited to say things like, we were these women who left our children at home, and then went off doing artworks when we should be, cooking meals and, looking after the home. So, it's very mixed, but like anything, we did get a lot of positive feedback, particularly just by ordinary people who were wandering in and out of the galleries, and seeing the work. So, yeah.
I mean, and you were clearly galvanized, however, you perceived that because immediately after Feministo, Fenix came about, sometimes spelled as F-E-N-I-X. So, yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about Fenix and how that was different from Feministo?
Yes, as I said, Feministo is just, we're just sending things to our friends, really. But during that process and having, put things on at the ICA, we realised that some of us like working together and we'd like to carry on. So Monica Ross, Kate Walker, myself and initially Susie Barty got together to work out something that we could do that would be a little bit different. And we hadn't got anywhere to work at home really, so we thought we'd try and find galleries who would host us for a few days around the country, and we'd go and work there and invite the public to come in and comment or take part in the work. We managed to set up, I think, 4 or 5, maybe 6 venues, and to carry that out we got a small grant from West Midlands Arts for travelling, and Kate was in London and the other 3 of us were in Birmingham, so we managed to organise getting to these venues, how I don't know, with suitcases with all our bits and pieces in, and then we would work together for a few days, which was absolutely great. And the only restriction we decided was that we needed to have we'd have it monochrome, we'd do it in black and white, because that way 4 of us could work together, but the exhibitions would hang together, it would still work, it wouldn't be too confusing for people coming in to see. So Fenix was about us breaking out of the mould and breaking out from being housewives and mothers and trying to sort of express how we felt about ourselves and where we wanted to be in this world, you know. And we did it over a period of a year, I think, in different venues. And it ended up being part of when Lucy Lippold curated, she's an American curator, when she put on a show in London at the ICA again called Issues, she invited us to be part of that, which was brilliant. So it was an international show of women's work.
So you were probably slightly underselling it when you said that originally you got into the ICA because you had a friend there. There was sort of some kind of radical programming there, and women's images of men followed issues shortly, I believe, and so it was all of a piece, and it was very much, although you used craft skills and very deliberately skills that you did not acquire at college, even though many of you did go to college. There was a deliberate decision there and some kind of, you know, commitment to DIY. Nevertheless, these were very specifically art projects. It was art rather than craft. The Craft Council exists and they wouldn't have touched you with a barge pole, whereas you've managed to get some money from the Arts Council.
For a community project.
Okay.
Yes.
Still
I mean, yes, it was always just using things that were easy for us to use that we could do at home or we could collect together at home, you know, in the living room or on the kitchen table or take with us. So, you know, there wasn't going to be any grand painting on a big scale. You know, it was all going to be bits and pieces made out of 8 boxes. But nevertheless, you know, we all were of one mind, you know, about what we were trying to say about our situation and other women's situation at the time. And yeah, I mean, if we used craft, it was purely and simply a method, you know, a way of communicating what we felt about things and how the world was at the time.
Kate Walker also published a manifesto for Feministo, and she argues that, you know, it's arts feminist is how Feministo came about, and that will be shown in Women in Revolt, opening in 10 days or so at Tate Britain, isn't it? And also your work is going to be shown alongside it. What are you showing there?
A piece called Bear It in Mind, which was part of Fenix, but also I'd made an earlier version as part of the Postal Event, and it's sort of some dungarees with a lot of pockets. It's really just about all the things you have to bear in mind when you're a young working mum. So it had many things coming out of the pockets, and that's the thing that they've chosen to purchase. But, you know, I'm not going to complain.
So that's also in the Tate collection now?
Yes, it's in the Tate collection now,
That's fantastic. So speaking of things hanging off other things and found objects, you're the one who mentioned that, not me. Let's talk a little bit about using aprons. You said that as well as crochet, you used found objects from the beginning.
Yeah, I do. Anything that's vaguely domestic, and if you can get it in Oxfam, it helps, you know, for 99p. So I've usually got a collection of aprons and tea towels. And I also quite like, I discovered after watching one of those programmes by the people in the chateau on the telly, they told you how to crochet from clothing, you know, and I just loved the idea. So, you know, I've sort of collected together bits of clothing from various friends, split it into great long strips, you know, crocheted it into a magnificent menopause mat, you know, which I think next door. Just the idea of using up stuff, you know, that's in the drawer is great. You know, I love recycling things. And there's something about sort of making, it's that make, do and mend thing that came from my mother's generation. You know, using what you've got and combining it with, you know, any skill that you've got to come up with something that represents the idea that you want to get across. But, you know, I mean, I trained as a graphic designer, so everything is about trying to get an idea across. You know, I mean, if people can't see when they look at my work what it's about without me talking about it, I'd be very unhappy. You know, you should be able to tell straight away what it is.
So training as a graphic designer at the time meant really being trained to write copy as well as to communicate in words and visually. And I think that really comes across in how you title your works very whimsically. So there is a bunting made out of gloves, which is another sort of format to which you return time and again. Do you want to talk about gloves as well? There's a few.
Gloves, hands, well, they're just hands. You know, women have to have so many pairs of hands, don't they? And you have to have many pairs of hands from your friends, you know, to get through life. So I collect gloves and make them into hands and arms, and they represent so many things. Yeah.
How about specifically, I wanted to go to the glove, because so much of your work is about labour, recognized, remunerated or non-remunerated, and you made a glove of a distorted hand, which is about lace makers, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, just a historical thing, really. I mean, I do a lot of reading, and I kind of thought about it for a while and realised that if you were a lace maker all your life, you know, your hands would be in a terrible state by the time you got to my age. And sure enough, you know, I did a bit of research, and women in Nottingham, the lace makers, had terrible arthritis in their hands from an early age. So I've used an old leather glove to show, you know, sort of gnarled hands. Just to recognise it, really. I've done quite a few bits of historical things that just recognise the things that women have done. I've done something about women chain makers, it's not here, but, you know, that all these things that get lost so easily, where women are doing work for less money than men for the same kind of work sometimes, or quite often. Still, yeah.
And before
Which is why Birmingham's bankrupt, isn't it? Thinking about it.
Allegedly bankrupt.
Yes, allegedly bankrupt, yeah. They're not paying women what they should have done. Yeah.
So in the background, we were meant to have some footage of your other creative life.
Yes.
Do you want to say something about that? Actually, could we play this without sound? Yeah. So that is Terry and Jerry.
When I started to have to do a proper job again, you know, once Ben had got to school, because there were no nursery facilities that anybody could afford in those days, and I was a teacher in a secondary school before I had him, and there was no maternity leave. That came in about 2 years later. So you just lost your job when you got pregnant. It's as simple as that. So I did lots of bits of part-time teaching, and at that time, late 70s, early 80s, I met these two guys, Terry and Jerry, who were songwriters, and really, really liked the stuff that they were writing. It was quite political, and it was, you know, around about the time of the miners' strikes and things. But they were great songwriters. They weren't great musicians. I mean, they were struggling with a guitar and a double bass, and they thought a washboard might be quite good. You know, they certainly didn't want a drummer. You know, so we kind of, you know, we had a good friendship, and we had a friend across the road who played really good guitar and could sing, Andy, and he joined us, and that's Jerry, and he was a good singer. So, you know, we just messed around playing a bit, and it was really good fun. And I think we went to the Punch Bowl Quinton and did a gig, and I felt very embarrassed sitting on a stool with the washboard on my knee, but, you know, it was quite good fun. And I don't quite know how, but within just a short period of time, really, probably just a couple of months, we managed to get some kind of a contact with the Mean Fiddler in London, which was the venue at the time that took small bands. And all I wanted was to know how big you were, how much you would, what you would do it for. Would you do it for 50 quid, you know, and would you turn up on time? And we said, oh yeah, you know, we can do all that. And through that gig, we got a London agent. So we spent the next 4 years doing the university tour circuit, quite often with, it was mainly, it was Asgard, and they were mainly country and folk agency. So we supported a lot of acts, as well as doing our own thing. And it was just great fun. I did it for 3 or 4 years, and as soon as I could, I got rid of the little washboard because they just wore out very quickly. And being from Birmingham, I decided I'd go to the to Sturchley, to the industrial estate where they made steel plate, and get them to make me a really big washboard. And they did, with a stand. so I could have a washboard roadie. And, you know, I went to Charles Isles and Goms through their little tiny door and ordered grosses of thimbles. You could only get them in a gross, so I've still got quite a lot. And, you know, yeah, just had good fun playing the washboard. I invented washboard music and, you know, did a bit of sort of, you know, looking into how Zydeco players and, you know, people who sort of, you know, revere washboard play in America went. We did actually go to New York and play, and that was interesting. I got a few sort of invitations to go and play in the Blue Mountains, but never quite got there.
But you played recently as well.
Oh yeah, well we reformed again. We did 3 or 4 years way back in the 80s, and then in 2014, I think it was, we realised we're all still alive, so we might as well get back together and have another go. And then we played up till last year, before they fell out again. These songwriters always fall out, you know, you can't, they're a nightmare. What can I say?
So I was going to ask you about breasts, but I'm going to put a, I was going to say put a pin in that, definitely the wrong thing to say, but I just wondered if you had any questions for Sue first. Yes.
Well, the very first thing that I produced was probably clothing, you know, baby clothes for my son. I learned how to do crochet through a friend who was doing the teacher training course that I was doing, and she did zigzag, and I just loved it. She taught me how to do it, and I just took to it. So the first things I made were things for my son that made everybody think he was a girl because they were zigzagging in fantastic colours, you know. So that was the first thing. But the first sort of artistic thing was the me. Really. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I wouldn't like to speak for them because I'm not one of those women. I mean, you know, I'm very aware that, you know, my work's very set in the 70s. It's just that most of the themes haven't changed. I wish they had. I wish things it didn't, you know, I wish you could get through menopause without it being a pain, you know, in every way. But people can't, can they? It's all become very fashionable again to talk about these things. So they're still there. So I think there are the kind of aspects that I'm interested in about women's lives are still there. When they're sorted, I won't do the work, you know.
But also some of the self-portraits are actually skins.
Yes.
So they are, yeah, not just the accessories of femininity that do date, as you said.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I mean, I do lots of work about our bodies, you know, and particularly, I'm trying to reclaim breasts. You know, I mean, there are boobies, they're not anybody else's, and I'm desperately trying to reclaim them, you know, and make them soft and lovely and things that women love as well.
Yes.
I mean, I think there's less of a difference now. You know, I mean, I think that's moved on quite a lot. But back in the 70s, when I was making things in crochet, nobody else was doing anything other than clothes. You know, it was quite straightforward. I mean, I've recently discovered that Jan Howarth before me was doing exactly the same kind of themes in patchwork. In fact, there's some here in the gallery. But I hadn't seen it till last week. And I think that's what I've got to say about it. Yeah. We should have seen it. It's there. Oh yes, it's very political. I mean, everything that I do is really, it's personally political, you know. Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, the distinction that I made was more institutional, actually. So I said that in this country particularly, the Crafts Council would not regard this as craft. Because it was, I mean, based on what I've read by scholars like Tanya Harrod, it was a reaction to the perceived de-skilling that was taking place in art because of conceptualism with a small c. And what you were doing was very much maybe using some of these techniques that were deprofessionalized and domestic, deliberately domestic, to make sort of personal political statements. So that would not count as craft in the end, whereas it could be perceived and was perceived as art. Any other questions? Yes?
Well, there probably was. I mean, I was definitely aware, you know, that it was the kind of things we were doing in the 70s were kind of appreciated in the States and in Europe and politically in Eastern Europe, you know, much more than in this country. I think they were just a bit farther ahead at the time. And so, yeah, there was more interest, and certainly, you know, it was understood as being fairly straightforward and normal. But it wasn't in this country. And that has changed, you know, to a certain extent. But I mean, even just recently, when I was, during lockdown, through my agent, I started to sell work from the 70s. And in 2 weeks, I sold almost all of the work that I'd done in the 70s, all to America and Europe. And we're still struggling to get something into a public collection in this country. And in fact, that piece in the tape is the first thing that's gone into a public collection.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's hard to place it because the first thing that was sold went to the Tisch collection in New York, and they didn't just buy one piece of crochet, they bought the whole table, you know, the whole table setting with sandwiches and a plate, and because it makes sense then. It doesn't make sense if you just pick one piece of work out. But because we were talking to public galleries who've got no money, you know, very limited resources, they could only afford to buy one thing and they didn't know where to put it. So, for instance, when we got quite a long way with negotiations with Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, and the poor curator there did her very best, you know, but at the end of the day, they picked a piece of jewellery, and it was perfectly clear why, you know, it was a piece of feminist jewellery, and it was lovely, a piece of silver, and it fitted into the silver collection, because it's a big collection. But where could they put a crochet plate, you know, and there's nowhere for it to, no context for it there. And they didn't think that we would give them the whole table setting, you know, for next to nothing. Probably would have, actually, if they'd asked. I was so keen at the time.
It's being recorded. Yes, okay. That's a very good, comprehensive answer. So the problem is that there's no such thing as a collection of feminist art.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And very few places where well, are there any only women galleries? Well, I don't know, maybe there are.
Feminist galleries, perhaps, yes. There was a question back there, yeah.
Oh yes, it's a big resurgence over the last few years. Well, because things come around again, don't they, every 40 years or so, probably. I mean, it was very fashionable in the 70s, you know, to have crochet clothes. And it's just sort of come around again, I think.
It's been quite a lot on television as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, and with social media, yeah.
And all those sorts of programmes.
Yeah, craft revival, there's definitely a craft revival, yeah. But it's still not valued, really, you know, in terms of the time it takes to do it. And there's a whole other area, and this whole thing about the undervaluation of craft. You know, even when you watch one of these programmes on telly in the mornings, and at lunchtime it shows what I did, didn't you know, where they're looking at a Welsh quilt and saying how wonderful it is. And, you know, it's going to go for £80. And you think, this is a phenomenal amount of work. You know, phenomenal. And the same applies to patchwork, you know, and all sorts of other things that are traditionally associated with women. I mean, unless you happen to be, I've forgotten his name now, the guy who does it, and he doesn't actually do it. He creates the patterns, and he gets the money from the sales, but some woman who's not named actually makes it. I was shocked to find that out, but it's true.
Well, maybe the medium is not always the message, because your engagement with that kind of domestic crafts was decidedly feminist, and I wonder if that celebration of, you know, things you can do at home is the same? Is it always the same? Does it have the same meaning? I don't know, when Kirsty also does it.
I don't know, it's such a huge question, isn't it? I just think, you know, that such a lot of things that are associated with women are undervalued, and still are. And I don't know why it is. I suppose it's because you can. You know? Women let that happen.
There's that thing about knowing your value, isn't it?
Yeah, there is, absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose in days gone by, you hadn't any choice, you know. Now you maybe have the choice that you wouldn't have had before. You know, you've got to feed your kids, haven't you?
Yeah, and thinking about it, because when you've mentioned that you have this gap, and thinking about extra labor women do, it also is a question of can work and women create, because you need time, you need space, creation.
Yeah.
And also, of course, this is all stuff you can do on the sofa.
Oh,
you do not need space. You need time, but you don't need space.
Space in your head.
Headspace, yes.
Space as no one interrupting you, even if you are in your own kitchen.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yeah, you know. I mean, I've only really been able to... When I look back now, I cannot imagine how I managed to make those pieces of work, particularly the ones in the early 80s, the very big crochets that are really detailed. You know, stuff I can't really do now because of the arthritis. But, you know, I can't imagine how I had the headspace to do it. I mean, I know now, you know, because I'm kind of semi-retired, I can do it now. But.
Yes, Leonie.
Well, I mean, I have to put a lot of it down to Joanna, you know, who's now my agent. She came to see my work, and I'd got it all put... this is all the old work before I started making anything again. And I think I got it all out on the bed in my bedroom. It had been kept like in a hamper and in a chest. And she looked through everything, you know, and she said, "This is fantastic," you know. And I said, "Why aren't you working now?" You know, and I said, "Well, I've done it all. You know, those are all my ideas," you know. And she said, "That shouldn't stop you, just do them again," you know. She said, "Most artists have one idea, you know, and they just keep doing it." She said, "You've got hundreds of ideas here, even if you just did them all again once," you know. And it was absolutely true, and it was a total eye-opener. It never occurred to me that I could only do an idea more than once, you know, that it would still be valid. Do it all the time now. Ignore me.
If there's no more questions, I have a final one to tie the two exhibitions currently on here together. I know that you've always had, first of all, you were obviously aware of pop art, and you've made a work for Pauline Botti.
Yes, I've done a homage to Pauline Botti because I went to art college in the late 60s, and we had Richard Hamilton came to set us some work at Newcastle Art College while I was there before I went to Leeds, you know, when I was 16. And I remember it vividly, you know. I mean, I made this big sort of thing out of hardboard, and it was a woman's body like a centerfold from Playboy, and she had doors that you could open, and inside the doors were her insides, you know. So I was obviously impressed, and it obviously worked, you know, but never did that, you know. I mean, I knew about Peter Blake, I knew about Tillotson, I knew about all these other people who were working. Nobody ever mentioned Pauline or Jan Howarth. And in fact, I've only recently seen their work, you know, in the last few years. I wasn't aware, you know, that those women worked. Terrible.
So, do you want to describe the work that you've made for...
It's based on one of her paintings, and it's a bum. It's called Bum. It's a bum cushion with little... It's got pom-poms in the corners and little curtains that draw back.
Amazing. So if you haven't seen Sue's show, please go see it. And obviously the Derek Boshier show upstairs, there are some very interesting conferences that have to do with press. I will say no more. But yes, thank you very much, Sue, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.